Close your eyes for a second. Now, imagine you're walking through a forest 200,000 years ago, and somewhere ahead of you, hidden behind a wall of trees, something is rotting. You can't see. 이파시 You can't hear it. But your nose already knows, and it's already telling your legs to turn around. That invisible warning system, the one you never think about, the one that's been quietly running in the background of your entire life, is older than language, older than fire, and arguably older than your eyes. Here's the strange part. We almost never talk about it. We talk about how humans learn to see, to walk upright, to use tools. Smell barely gets a mention. And yet, it might be the very first sense that shaped how our ancestors understood the world. Because long before there was anything to look at with meaning, there was something to smell with urgency. So, how did this happen? How did a wet nose on an early primate become the organ that can detect a gas leak, a spoiled egg, or your grandmother's perfume from across her room? And more importantly, when did smell stop being just survival and start becoming something else entirely? Something closer to memory, identity, even art? Let's start with the biology, because it's genuinely strange. Unlike sight or hearing, smell doesn't pass through the brain's usual relay station. Visual signals and sound signals get routed through the thalamus first, like mail going through a sorting office before delivery. Smell skips that step completely. It goes straight to the limbic system, the ancient part of your brain responsible for emotion and memory. This isn't a small detail. It means smell was wired into your emotional core before it was wired into your conscious thought. Why would evolution build it this way? Think about what smell actually does for an animal. It tells you, instantly, without analysis, whether something is food, poison, a mate, or a predator. There's no time for deliberation when a scent on the wind might mean a leopard is 20 feet away. The nose had to talk directly to the part of the brain that triggers fear, hunger, and desire. Speed mattered more than precision. Now here's where it gets interesting, because for a long time, scientists assumed humans were the bad smellers of the animal kingdom. The joke version goes like this. Dogs have hundreds of millions of scent receptors, and humans have a measly 5 or 6 million. So obviously, we're terrible at this. Case closed. Except it isn't closed at all. In 1991, two researchers named Linda Buck and Richard Axel made a discovery that completely rewrote our understanding of smell. They identified the actual genes responsible for olfactory receptors, the molecular sensors in your nose that detect different odor molecules. It turned out humans carry roughly 400 functional genes for these receptors. That's a massive number. The discovery was so significant that Buck and Axel were awarded the Nobel Prize in Physiology or Medicine in 2004 for it. But here's the twist inside the twist. As geneticists kept digging, they found something odd. Compared to our primate ancestors, humans have lost a huge proportion of working olfactory receptor genes. Many of them are still sitting in our DNA, but they're broken, switched off. What geneticists call pseudogenes. A researcher named Yoav Gilad led studies comparing these genes across primates, and the pattern was clear. As primates evolved better color vision, they seemed to need their noses less, and many smell-related genes quietly degraded over millions of years. So which is it? Are humans smell-impaired or smell-equipped? The honest answer is both, and that contradiction is actually the whole story. We lost a lot of raw receptor diversity compared to our distant ancestors, but what we kept became extraordinarily refined, and more importantly, extraordinarily connected to higher cognition. We didn't just inherit a nose, we inherited a nose wired directly into memory and emotion, and then we built a brain sophisticated enough to do something almost no other animal does with smell. We started attaching meaning to it. Think about what that actually requires. A wolf can smell fear on another wolf. That's a direct biological signal, no different in principle from a chemical alarm. But somewhere in human history, a smell stopped being just information and started being a symbol. The scent of a particular plant didn't just mean edible or not edible. It started meaning home, or safety, or someone who is no longer here. This is where things get genuinely beautiful, because smell and memory share a connection that researchers have spent decades trying to explain. Psychologist Rachel Herz has spent much of her career studying exactly this link, often called the Proust Phenomenon, named after the famous moment in literature when a single bite of a small cake triggers an overwhelming flood of childhood memory. Hertz's research found that odor-triggered memories are not just more vivid than memories triggered by sight or sound. They are more emotional, and they tend to transport people back to a specific moment with startling intensity. Why would smell have this power? Part of the answer lies right back in that direct wiring to the limbic system. The hippocampus, your memory center, and the amygdala, your emotional processing center, sit right next door to the olfactory bulb. Visually, you remember that something happened. With smell, you can feel like you're there again. Has that ever happened to you? A single scent, completely unexpected, and suddenly you're 8 years old again, standing in a kitchen that no longer exists. Now let's go back to ancient humans, because this emotional, memory-soaked relationship with smell didn't appear overnight. It almost certainly began with something far more practical: the search for food and the avoidance of danger. Early hominids living in dense forests would have relied heavily on smell to detect ripening fruit long before it was visible, to identify which plants are toxic, and to sense the presence of predators or rival groups through scent trails left behind. But somewhere along the way, smell took on a second job, one connected to fire. The control of fire, which most researchers place somewhere around 1 million years ago for some hominid groups, didn't just change diet and safety, it introduced an entirely new category of smell into the human experience: the smell of cooking, of smoke, of transformation. Anthropologist Kara Hoover has written extensively about how smell shaped human evolution, arguing that our sense of smell was deeply involved not just in finding food, but in social bonding, group recognition, and even early forms of communication. Around a fire, with food cooking and smoke curling upward, smell wasn't just telling you, this is edible. It was telling you, this is us, this is home, this is safe. And that's a profound shift. Once smell started marking group identity rather than just individual survival, it took on a social dimension. Different groups likely had different characteristic smells, from diet, from the plants they used, from the way they prepared their bodies. Recognizing a familiar smell could mean recognizing kin. An unfamiliar smell could mean a stranger or a threat. So, when did humans start deliberately manipulating smell rather than just reacting to it? This is where archaeology gets genuinely fascinating, because the evidence suggests humans were creating fragrance on purpose far earlier than most people assume. Excavations across the Middle East and Mediterranean have uncovered evidence of resin burning, aromatic plant use, and scented oils dating back many thousands of years before written history. Long before perfume bottles, before written language, humans were already burning specific plants, not for food, not for warmth, but seemingly for the experience of the smell itself. This is the moment where smell crosses the same line that language crossed, from signal to symbol. A signal says, this is dangerous, or this is food. A symbol says, this smell represents something. A ritual, a god, a memory, a status. The deliberate use of incense in early religious and burial practices across multiple ancient cultures suggests something remarkable. Humans had begun to associate certain smells with the sacred, with death, with transition between worlds. Smell had become spiritual technology, Consider what that required cognitively. To burn a specific plant, not because it's useful, but because of the emotional and symbolic weight of its scent, you need abstraction. You need the ability to say, this physical sensation represents something beyond itself. That's the same cognitive leap that allowed humans to create art, to bury their dead with grave goods, to paint animals on cave walls that weren't there to be eaten, only to be remembered. And once that leap happened, smell became deeply tangled with status and identity in ways that persist today. Ancient Egyptian elites used elaborate perfumed oils not just for pleasure, but as markers of social rank and religious devotion. The production of incense and fragrant resins became valuable enough to drive trade routes spanning thousands of miles. Entire economies grew around substances whose only function was to smell a certain way. Isn't it strange that something as intangible as an odor could become valuable enough to fight wars over? By the time we reach written history, smell had completed an extraordinary journey. It started as a primal warning system, a chemical tripwire connected directly to fear and hunger. It became a memory machine, capable of collapsing decades in a single breath. It became a marker of belonging, the invisible signature of home and kin. And eventually, it became art, ritual, status, and economy, deliberately created and deliberately consumed, purely for what it made people feel. What's remarkable is how much of this ancient wiring is still sitting inside you, right now, completely unchanged. When you walk past a bakery and suddenly feel comforted, that's the same limbic shortcut that once warned your ancestors of danger in a forest. When a particular cologne reminds you instantly of a person you haven't seen in years, that's the Proust Phenomenon that Rachel Hertz studied, playing out in real time in your own brain. When you light a candle to make a space feel calmer, you're doing, in a much gentler form, exactly what humans were doing with burning resin thousands of years before anyone wrote anything down. We tend to think of smell as the least important sense, the one we'd give up first if we had to choose. But it might actually be the oldest thread connecting you to the earliest humans who ever lived. Long before anyone could describe a feeling in words, they could feel it arrive through their nose, instantly, wordlessly, undeniably. So the next time a smell catches you off guard, and suddenly you're somewhere else entirely, someone you used to know, a place you used to live, a version of yourself you'd almost forgotten. Remember what's actually happening. You're not imagining it. You're experiencing one of the oldest, most direct lines your brain has ever built. A line that connects straight back through firelit caves, through burial rituals, through the very first humans who ever paused mid-step because something on the wind told them, before they could even think it, that everything was about to change. And maybe that's the real story here. Long before humans had words for danger, or memory, or home, or sacred, they had a smell for it. And in the quiet space behind your eyes right now, reading this, breathing without thinking about it, that ancient, invisible warning system is still running, still wired straight into your heart, still doing exactly what it's always done, telling you, before you even realize it, that something is about to change.